It began as an ordinary afternoon in a quiet Charleston neighborhood. Kids laughing in a sunlit living room, a mother texting her husband about dinner plans, and a teenage girl, trusted, familiar, and smiling, walking through the front door. Within minutes, that same home would become a scene of unthinkable horror. When police arrived, they found 32-year-old Sophia Mitchell and her two young sons, Liam and Noah, shot execution style, one still wearing his favorite Captain America costume. The killer hadn't broken in. There were no signs of a struggle. It was someone they knew, someone they loved. As detectives began piecing together what had happened, a shocking truth surfaced, one that would leave an entire community breathless. The killer wasn't a stranger, nor a masked intruder. It was Sophia's own teenage sister-in-law, 17-year-old Ashley Callison. What could drive a seemingly normal girl to slaughter her own family? What darkness hides behind the face of innocence? Today, we dive deep into the chilling case of Ashley Callison, the teen who killed her sister-in-law and nephews. Before we continue, make sure to hit that like button if you care about uncovering the truth behind real-life tragedies. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep-dive documentaries into the world's most haunting cases. And tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global community come together to discuss stories that challenge the limits of human understanding. The afternoon sun cast long, golden rays across the quiet Charleston neighborhood, a place where life usually hummed with the soft sounds of children playing, sprinklers clicking, and neighbors exchanging lazy greetings. On that March afternoon, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Inside the Mitchell home, Sophia Mitchell was tidying the living room while her two young sons, 5-year-old Liam and 3-year-old Noah, filled the air with laughter. Liam was building a tower out of colorful blocks, proud of every new layer, while Noah danced around in his beloved Captain America costume, his tiny plastic shield gleaming in the light. Sophia recorded a short video of the boys, smiling as she told them to wave for Daddy. At that exact moment, a red hatchback rolled quietly into the driveway. The driver, 17-year-old Ashley Callison, Sophia's sister-in-law, stepped out, completely unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that she was about to end 3 lives in cold blood. When Charleston police arrived roughly an hour later, the street that had once echoed with laughter had turned into a corridor of grief. Patrol cars blocked both ends of the road, yellow tape fluttered in the soft spring breeze, and curious neighbors stood frozen, their faces drained of color. Officer Melissa Jenkins, the first responder, would later say she'd never forget the silence when she entered the house. "It didn't feel like a crime scene at first," she recalled. "It felt like time had stopped." In the living room, she found Sophia slumped on the couch, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. Nearby, little Liam lay face down near the hallway, as though he had tried to run. Behind an armchair, Noah's tiny body was curled in a ball, his Captain America mask still in place. The innocence of it all, the toys scattered, the cartoons frozen on the TV, clashed violently with the horror that had just unfolded. Detective Ryan Cooper, a 15-year veteran of Charleston's homicide unit, arrived minutes later, his gut already telling him this was no random attack. The front door was locked, no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing. Everything about the scene screamed familiarity. On the coffee table sat a 9mm handgun, registered to Sophia's husband, David Mitchell. The gun safe upstairs had been opened with the correct combination, a detail that immediately raised suspicions. Whoever had done this hadn't stumbled in by chance. They had known the code, known the house, known the victims. Cooper looked around the living room at the family photos. David and Sophia smiling on a beach, the boys dressed as superheroes for Halloween, and felt a quiet rage build in his chest. Whoever pulled that trigger had shattered something pure. As the coroner's team arrived and the bodies were gently removed, David Mitchell's car came screeching to a stop outside. His calls to Sophia had gone unanswered, his sister's earlier frantic phone call echoing in his ears. "Something's happened at your house." When officers stopped him at the yellow tape, the look on his face said everything. He screamed his wife's name, begged them to tell him it wasn't true. Officer body cams captured the moment he fell to his knees as reality sank in. His entire family was gone. Neighbors stood silently, some weeping, as the once ordinary suburban street became the scene of one of the most horrifying crimes Charleston had ever witnessed. By nightfall, the neighborhood was lit with camera flashes and emergency lights. Reporters gathered, their voices hushed as they struggled to summarize the unimaginable. Who could kill a young mother and two innocent children in broad daylight? Who would even think to do it? The answer, as detectives would soon uncover, wasn't hidden in the shadows of Charleston. It was within the Mitchell family itself. A teenage girl with no history of violence, no warning signs of pure evil, or perhaps signs no one ever thought to see, had just committed the unthinkable. And as the evidence began to speak, the truth would only grow darker. That Monday began like any other in the Mitchell household, a picture of suburban normalcy that could have belonged to any American family. David Mitchell left early for work, dressed in a crisp suit, coffee in hand, kissing Sophia on the cheek before heading out the door. She smiled, half distracted, as she packed Liam's lunchbox and reminded him not to forget his backpack. Little Noah was still in his pajamas, tugging at her sleeve, begging to wear his Captain America costume again, to which she laughed and gave in as usual. "All right, my little superhero," she said playfully, fastening the Velcro strap around his shoulders. The smell of pancakes filled the air. The morning sun spilled through white curtains, and for a brief moment, the Mitchell home was just another haven of family warmth and laughter. No one could have imagined that within hours, that same kitchen would be silent, and the woman and two children inside would never see another sunrise. Sophia spent the morning doing what mothers do best, managing the chaos of small children with a kind of grace that looked effortless. After dropping Liam at preschool, she stopped by the grocery store, chatted briefly with a neighbor about the upcoming neighborhood barbecue, and returned home with Noah around noon. He helped her unload the groceries, carrying a loaf of bread that was nearly too big for his tiny hands. She texted David around 12:30, a string of simple updates. "Got the groceries. Liam's excited about building his Lego set later. Don't forget to pick up milk." Her messages painted the portrait of a normal day, the kind of messages every spouse takes for granted until they stop coming. David replied with a heart emoji and a "love you," unaware that it would be the last time he'd ever text his wife. At around 2:15 p.m., the neighbor's security camera captured Ashley Callison's red hatchback pulling into the Mitchell driveway. She was alone, wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying what appeared to be a small tote bag. There was no hesitation in her steps as she walked toward the front door, as if she had been there 100 times before, which, in truth, she had. Sophia had always welcomed her. Ashley was family, after all. The teenage sister who loved to babysit her nephews, bake cookies with them, and watch cartoons. She was the fun aunt who brought candy, played superhero games, and shared inside jokes with the boys. When Sophia opened the door that day, she likely smiled, unaware of the darkness brewing behind Ashley's quiet demeanor. Just before 2:43 p.m., Sophia sent a series of short videos to David. In them, Liam and Noah are playing happily, Liam showing off a tall block tower and Noah spinning in circles, his Captain America costume flaring as he laughs uncontrollably. In one clip, Ashley is faintly visible in the background, sitting on the sofa, smiling. It was a peaceful domestic scene, perfectly ordinary, the kind of moment families capture every day without realizing how precious it truly is. 4 minutes later, the house would fall silent. The same videos that showed laughter would become the final evidence of life. Those time stamps, 2:43 p.m. for the video and 2:47 p.m. for the approximate time of death, would later haunt the investigators who pieced together that narrow, irreversible window between joy and horror. By the time Ashley called her brother at 3:17 p.m., pretending to be hysterical, telling him she'd found the bodies and fled from an intruder, her voice was convincingly panicked. David had no reason to doubt her. Why would he? She was his kid sister. The idea that she might be lying never even crossed his mind. He dialed 911, his voice shaking as he pleaded for help, repeating, "My wife and kids are hurt. Please hurry." In those few minutes, his world collapsed without him yet realizing who had caused it. As police sirens echoed down the quiet suburban street, Ashley sat in her car a few blocks away, watching the chaos unfold. Whether she felt fear, guilt, or nothing at all in that moment remains one of the most haunting mysteries of this case. When investigators entered the Mitchell home, the scene appeared almost staged, eerily untouched, except for the unspeakable violence that had taken place within its walls. The living room still held the remnants of family life, toys scattered on the carpet, a half-empty juice box on the coffee table, a television paused on a cartoon frame. But beneath that haunting stillness lay the forensic truth that would soon begin to unravel Ashley Callison's carefully constructed lie. Detective Ryan Cooper and his team started methodically documenting every inch of the scene, photographing blood patterns, collecting shell casings, and marking footprints that led from the living room to the master bedroom and back again. Every detail mattered, because somewhere among them lay the proof of who had pulled the trigger. And it wouldn't take long before the evidence began to speak louder than Ashley's words ever could. The first discovery that raised suspicion was the gun itself, a 9mm handgun sitting squarely on the coffee table. It belonged to David Mitchell, legally registered and normally kept locked inside a gun safe in the master bedroom. There was no sign of forced entry on the safe. It hadn't been broken into or pried open. It had been unlocked with the correct combination. David told investigators he had never shared the code with anyone, not even his wife. Yet someone had opened it with precision, retrieved the gun, and brought it downstairs. That someone had to know the combination. The only other person who might have learned it, according to David, was his younger sister Ashley, who had once joined him and Sophia for target practice. The realization hit him like ice. Could she have remembered the code from that day? Could she really have used it to murder them? He dismissed the thought immediately. Family doesn't do that. But the evidence was starting to tell another story. As the crime scene unit processed the house, they found partial bloody footprints, small in size, consistent with a teenage girl's shoes, leading to the bedroom and back. When investigators seized Ashley's sneakers later that night, traces of Sophia's blood were found on the soles. The pattern told a clear story. The killer had walked toward the safe after the murders, perhaps to stage the scene or retrieve something else, then returned to the living room. These weren't the footsteps of someone fleeing in terror. They belonged to someone moving with disturbing calm and control. At first, Ashley had claimed she must have stepped in blood after finding the bodies. But forensic mapping disproved that. Her movements lined up exactly with the window of time when the killings occurred, not after. Meanwhile, the digital evidence began to close in. The Mitchell home's security system didn't have cameras, but it did have an electronic log showing every time a door was opened. That log revealed that the back door was opened only twice that afternoon, once at 2:17 p.m. when Ashley arrived, and again at 3:15 p.m. when she left. No other entries, no intruder, no mysterious break-in. The timeline was airtight. Adding to that, Sophia's videos sent at 2:43 p.m. showed Ashley alive and well in the living room just 4 minutes before the murders, and Ashley's cell phone pinged from the Mitchell home until 3:15, contradicting her claim that she fled immediately after hearing gunshots. The data didn't lie. She had stayed inside the house for nearly 30 minutes after killing them, long enough to stage her story and make that fateful phone call. When forensic technicians analyzed the gun, the final pieces fell into place. Ashley's fingerprints were found on the handle, trigger, and magazine, along with gunshot residue on her hands and clothing. She tried to explain it away, said she had picked up the gun in panic after finding the bodies, but the science didn't bend to her story. Gunshot residue doesn't just appear from touching a weapon, it embeds into the skin and fibers from firing it. There was no question now. The same young girl who had once been a doting aunt had murdered her sister-in-law and two innocent nephews. The evidence spoke with cold precision, louder and clearer than any confession could. And yet, for investigators, one haunting question lingered. Why? Why would Ashley do this? What darkness had turned a teenage girl into a killer? When Ashley Callison first sat across from detectives in the sterile gray interview room, she looked more like a frightened honor student than a cold-blooded killer. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a bottle of water, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. She repeated the same story she'd told her brother over the phone. She had gone to visit Sophia and the boys, heard loud noises and a man shouting, entered through the back door, found them already dead, and ran in fear. It was a story that, on the surface, sounded plausible, a young girl stumbling upon unimaginable horror. But Detective Ryan Cooper had been doing this long enough to recognize when a story was too neat, too perfectly tragic. There were no signs of panic in Ashley's movements that day, no call to 911, no attempt to get help from a neighbor. And when the evidence began to contradict her every word, her calm facade started to crack. The first inconsistency came when Cooper presented the door log from the Mitchell home. He slid the printout across the table. Ashley, according to this, the back door only opened twice. When you entered and when you left. There's no sign of anyone else entering that house. Can you explain that? Ashley stared at the paper, her expression blank before she muttered, "Maybe the intruder knew how to bypass it." Cooper pressed gently, asking how she knew someone was in the house if she hadn't seen them. She hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "I heard yelling," she replied, "and a thump." Her voice wavered, but not from sadness, from uncertainty, the kind that comes when a lie begins to collapse under its own weight. Cooper didn't push too hard yet, he just let the silence hang, knowing that silence was often more revealing than words. Then came the security timestamps and the phone data. Ashley's phone had remained inside the Mitchell home until 3:15 p.m., contradicting her claim that she ran away the moment she found the bodies. "So you stayed there for half an hour after discovering 3 murders?" Cooper asked quietly. "Why didn't you call 911? Ashley's answer was immediate but hollow. "I panicked. I just wanted to get out." It was the kind of excuse detectives hear all the time, yet her calm demeanor didn't match it. Her pulse was steady, her tone collected. There were no tears, no trembling, no disorientation, just a teenager calmly spinning a narrative while the walls of evidence closed in. When forensic reports confirmed that her hands and clothing tested positive for gunshot residue, the narrative she'd built crumbled further. Ashley blinked in disbelief, her lips tightening into a line. "That's impossible," she said. "I didn't shoot anyone. Maybe it got on me when I picked up the gun." Cooper, maintaining his steady tone, replied, "Ashley, you didn't mention touching the gun before. Why didn't you tell us that earlier?" There was a pause, long, uncomfortable, the kind that fills a room with tension you can almost taste. Finally, she said, "I forgot." Her attorney shifted in his seat, sensing the weight of that answer. Every forgotten detail added another crack to her carefully built version of events, exposing the truth beneath. As Cooper leaned back in his chair, he decided to ask the question that had been hanging between them since the beginning. "Ashley, help me understand. If you didn't do this, then who did? Who had the code to that gun safe? Who could walk into that house without forcing a door? For the first time, her composure faltered. Her jaw clenched, and her voice turned sharp. I don't know. Maybe someone else knew the code. Maybe Sophia told someone. But her eyes flickered, betraying a flash of something darker. Resentment. Maybe anger. In that moment, Cooper realized she wasn't afraid because of what she'd seen. She was afraid because of what she'd done. The calm, sweet-faced teenager sitting across from him wasn't a victim. She was a liar caught in her own web, and soon every thread of that web would unravel completely, exposing not just her guilt, but the twisted motive behind it. For weeks, detectives had one question looping endlessly in their minds. Why? Why would a 17-year-old girl murder her sister-in-law and two innocent children? There was no money involved, no history of abuse, no evidence of mental illness severe enough to explain the brutality. But when investigators began digging into Ashley Callison's private life, her journals, her text messages, her search history, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Beneath the surface of the smiling, helpful teenager, everyone thought they knew was a volcano of jealousy, resentment, and emotional instability that had been quietly building for years. Ashley wasn't just envious of Sophia Mitchell. She was obsessed with her. Sophia was everything Ashley wanted to be: beautiful, admired, stable, loved. The resentment had begun innocently enough, sparked by comparison, but over time it twisted into something darker. In Ashley's mind, Sophia hadn't just taken her brother. She had stolen her entire place in the family. Text messages between Ashley and her friends revealed a pattern of unhealthy fixation. She often complained that her brother David no longer spent time with her like he used to. "Sophia turned him against me," one message read. "Ever since he married her, it's like I don't exist." She also wrote about feeling unwanted, describing herself as the shadow in her own family. To outsiders, those words might have sounded like teenage angst, but to investigators, they were the roots of something far more sinister, a festering obsession with control and belonging. Psychologists later noted that Ashley showed signs of what's known as displaced jealousy, a type of possessive envy that can become dangerous when a person feels abandoned or overshadowed. And when David and Sophia built a happy life together, complete with two sons, Ashley's envy boiled over into pure hatred. Her journals painted an even bleaker picture. Scrawled in the pages of a spiral notebook were thoughts that swung between affection and contempt for her brother's family. One chilling entry read, "If they weren't around, everything would go back to how it was." Another simply said, "I could fix this." Those words sent shivers down the spine of every detective who read them. It wasn't the writing of someone impulsive. It was someone planning, fantasizing, rationalizing. The notebook was found tucked under Ashley's mattress, next to drawings of her family with Sophia's face scratched out in pen. It was a glimpse into the unraveling mind of a girl who couldn't separate love from possession. The motive became clearer when detectives interviewed Ashley's classmates. Several remembered her breaking down months earlier after seeing a social media post of David and Sophia celebrating their anniversary. "She said Sophia ruined everything," one friend recalled. "She looked angry, like she wanted to hurt her." Another classmate said Ashley had recently stopped hanging out with friends altogether, retreating into herself, often spending time scrolling through her brother's family photos. In the days leading up to the murders, her search history showed disturbing queries. How to erase fingerprints, how long it takes police to arrive after gunshots, and fastest way to die from gunshot. For prosecutors, those searches destroyed any claim of panic or accidental violence. This had been deliberate. By the time the full motive was laid bare, it became clear this wasn't about a single moment of rage. It was the culmination of years of emotional decay. Ashley's jealousy had turned pathological, her loneliness evolving into a fixation that made her see Sophia not as a sister-in-law, but as an enemy who had stolen everything. And in her mind, the only way to take back what she'd lost was to destroy what Sophia had built. The tragedy wasn't just in the act itself, but in the slow, silent unraveling that no one noticed until it was far too late. Behind Ashley's innocent smile had lived a storm waiting to break, and when it did, it wiped out an entire family. The morning Ashley Callison was arrested, the sky over Charleston was gray and heavy, as if the city itself sensed the weight of what was coming. Police cruisers rolled quietly up the driveway of the Callison home at 7:12 a.m., their lights flashing silently. Inside, the family was just waking up, Ashley's mother making coffee, her father reading the morning paper, and Ashley sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. When Detective Ryan Cooper knocked on the door, the look on her parents' faces was confusion, not fear. "Is there something wrong?" her mother asked politely. But as soon as Cooper stepped inside and said the words, "Ashley, you're under arrest for the murders of Sophia Mitchell, Liam Mitchell, and Noah Mitchell," the air seemed to vanish from the room. Ashley didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead, her face expressionless, as her mother's mug fell to the floor, shattering like the life they once knew. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains as the teenage girl they'd seen mowing lawns and babysitting was led out in handcuffs. One woman whispered, "She was always so quiet," while another crossed herself and murmured a prayer. The Callison family's world crumbled in real time. Ashley's mother begged the officers to tell her there'd been some mistake. "She wouldn't hurt anyone," she sobbed. "She loved those boys." Her father, pale and shaking, stood frozen at the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. The officers remained professional but solemn. They had seen countless arrests before, but this one felt different. There was no satisfaction in it, only heartbreak. When Ashley was placed in the back seat of the patrol car, she glanced back toward her parents, her expression flat, detached, almost curious. It was as though she was watching someone else's life fall apart, not her own. When David Mitchell heard the news that his little sister had been arrested for killing his wife and children, something inside him broke beyond repair. He refused to believe it at first, pacing the police station hallways, shouting, "You've got it wrong! She found them! She didn't do this!" But when detectives showed him the evidence, the security logs, the footprints, the fingerprints on the gun, his anger turned to devastation. The video of Sophia and the boys, captured just minutes before their deaths, played on a monitor before him. And there, in the corner of the frame, was Ashley, smiling, alive, present. David fell silent. The man who had once seen his sister as the person he'd sworn to protect now realized she was the one who had destroyed everything he loved. His tears didn't come right away. Instead, there was a long, hollow silence, the kind that comes when grief is too vast for sound. The arrest sent shockwaves through both families. At school, Ashley's classmates were stunned. Teachers described her as quiet but intelligent, someone who'd never caused trouble. "It's hard to believe she could do something like that," one said to a local reporter. The Callisons became outcasts overnight. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Her parents faced a cruel reality, grieving for the victims while knowing their own daughter had caused it. They couldn't attend Sophia and the boys' funerals without feeling the weight of every stare, every whisper that followed them. Both families had lost everything, bound together by tragedy, but separated by betrayal. As Ashley sat alone in a holding cell that night, the weight of her actions began to settle in. Not visibly, not through tears or apologies, but in the way she stared blankly at the wall, unmoving. She wasn't handcuffed to a chair anymore, but her freedom was gone, her world stripped bare. In another house across town, David Mitchell sat on the floor surrounded by his children's toys, unable to comprehend how his own blood had turned into his family's destroyer. Two families broken, one by loss, the other by guilt. And in the echo of that silence, Charleston began to ask itself a haunting question. How could someone so young, so familiar, carry a darkness this deep? When the psychological evaluations of Ashley Callison began, the experts expected to find a deeply disturbed teenager, someone unstable, impulsive, maybe even delusional. But what they discovered instead was far more chilling, a mind that was disturbingly calm, methodical, and emotionally detached from the horror she had caused. In interviews, Ashley spoke about the murders not with remorse or terror, but with a kind of eerie detachment, as if describing a movie she'd once watched rather than something she had done. Dr. Eleanor Green, one of the forensic psychologists assigned to the case, later said, "What unsettled me most wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. There was no empathy, no grief, no guilt. It was like she was emotionally hollow." That emptiness would become the central theme of her psychological profile, a void where compassion should have been, replaced by an unsettling fascination with control and attention. During her first evaluation, Ashley maintained that she had no memory of pulling the trigger. She claimed to have blacked out, insisting that she'd lost time between entering the house and finding the bodies. But neuropsychological testing found no evidence of dissociation or psychosis. What the experts did find was a personality dominated by narcissistic traits, an inflated sense of self-importance, a hunger for validation, and an inability to handle rejection or emotional displacement. She wasn't insane, Dr. Green explained. She was emotionally fractured, self-centered to the point of cruelty, but fully aware of right and wrong. The results showed a teenager who believed the world owed her attention and affection, and when she didn't get it, she punished those she believed had taken it from her. Her upbringing added another layer to the psychological puzzle. Friends and relatives described Ashley as a sensitive child, bright, but needy. She had grown up idolizing her older brother David, following him everywhere, mimicking his habits, craving his approval. When he married Sophia, that adoration turned into resentment. In therapy sessions, Ashley admitted to feeling invisible after the wedding, describing Sophia as the thief who took everything. Experts called this an emotional fixation, an unhealthy attachment that morphed into obsession. When Sophia became a mother, the gap widened further. "She stole him twice," Ashley once said. "First as a wife, then as a mother." Those words, spoken without hesitation, revealed the twisted logic behind her actions. She hadn't just wanted Sophia gone. She wanted to erase the version of her brother's life that didn't include her. What disturbed psychologists most was Ashley's complete lack of remorse. Even after being shown crime scene photos and recordings of her brother's breakdown, she remained unmoved. When asked if she regretted what she'd done, she replied, "It doesn't matter now. They're gone. I can't change it." There was no tremor in her voice, no visible pain, just a chilling acceptance. To her, remorse was irrelevant because she believed herself to be the real victim of neglect, of emotional abandonment, of a family that didn't see her pain. But that pain had transformed into something monstrous, a justification for the unthinkable. By the time the psychological evaluations concluded, experts agreed that Ashley Callison wasn't insane in the legal sense. She understood her actions, planned them, and carried them out with full awareness. But she embodied what Dr. Green called emotional vacancy, a state where empathy no longer exists, replaced by the cold logic of self-obsession. She was, in every sense, a mirror reflecting the dark side of human emotion. What happens when love curdles into envy and belonging twists into possession. And as the trial loomed closer, prosecutors knew that understanding her mind wouldn't save her. It would only make the tragedy feel deeper. Because in Ashley's calm, unfeeling gaze, they saw not madness, but the terrifying capability of ordinary evil. The courthouse in Charleston was packed to capacity on the first day of Ashley Callison's trial. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashed relentlessly, and spectators filled every available seat. The quiet, tree-lined street outside buzzed with whispers of disbelief. A teenager accused of murdering her sister-in-law and two nephews. It was the kind of case that didn't just make headlines, it froze communities in fear. Ashley entered the courtroom wearing a plain beige sweater and no makeup, her long brown hair tied neatly behind her shoulders. She looked like a high school student showing up for a class presentation, not someone standing trial for triple homicide. The contrast between her youthful appearance and the gravity of her crimes created a haunting dissonance that hung heavy in the air. As she sat down at the defense table beside her attorney, she didn't look at her brother David, seated just a few feet away. He, on the other hand, couldn't look anywhere else. The prosecution opened with cold precision, presenting the timeline, the forensic evidence, and the videos from Sophia's phone that captured Ashley in the living room just minutes before the murders. Prosecutor Laura Bennett's voice was calm but piercing as she addressed the jury. This was not the act of an insane person. This was the act of someone who chose control over compassion, jealousy over love, and destruction over family. The jurors watched the footage in silence, many wincing as images of the crime scene flashed on the screen. Ashley stared straight ahead, her expression unchanging. Her defense attorney, however, painted a different picture, one of a confused, mentally fragile young woman who suffered a psychological break she couldn't control. He argued that Ashley had been emotionally neglected, pushed to the edge by feelings of rejection and isolation. She didn't know what she was doing, he pleaded. She snapped. But the evidence told a story that sympathy couldn't rewrite. When David Mitchell took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. His voice trembled as he spoke, describing the love he once had for his sister and the unimaginable betrayal that followed. "I used to protect her," he said, his eyes locked on Ashley. "I never thought I'd need protection from her." He described the day he found out his wife and children were gone, how he collapsed in the police station hallway, and how his world had never recovered. His testimony wasn't full of anger. It was something worse. Heartbreak. The jury watched him closely, feeling the weight of every word. Ashley avoided eye contact, her gaze fixed on her folded hands. If she felt anything, she didn't show it. As the days passed, witness after witness painted the same disturbing picture. A jealous, emotionally manipulative teenager whose obsession with her brother had spiraled into madness. Friends spoke about her erratic behavior, her cryptic journals, and her growing resentment toward Sophia. Forensic experts detailed the evidence, gunshot residue, matching shoe prints, and Ashley's internet searches that read like a confession written in code. The prosecution rested its case with an image of Sophia and her two sons smiling at a park, reminding the jury of what was truly lost. "They aren't just victims of violence," Bennett said. "They're victims of a love twisted into hatred." After nearly 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. As the judge read the decision, Ashley didn't cry or flinch. She simply blinked, her lips pressed into a thin line as if the words meant nothing. David sat in the front row, tears finally breaking through as he whispered, "Why, Ashley?" to no one in particular. The courtroom filled with quiet sobs from both families, united by grief, but divided forever by blood. The judge sentenced Ashley Callison to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And as she was led away, the girl who once seemed ordinary vanished into the gray walls of the justice system, her name now etched among the darkest chapters of Charleston's history. In the months following the trial, David Mitchell's life became a quiet echo of the one he had lost. The laughter that once filled his home was replaced by silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. The toys remained untouched in the living room, the tiny handprints on the hallway wall still visible, and Sophia's favorite mug sat on the kitchen counter, untouched since that fateful day. Every corner of the house was a memory he couldn't escape, a memory of what was, and a reminder of who had taken it away. People told him he needed to move on, to heal, to start again. But how do you heal from the kind of wound that cuts through your very soul? Every morning he woke to an empty house. Every night he fell asleep to the echoes of voices that no longer existed. He didn't just lose a wife and children. He lost the version of himself that believed the world was good. At first, David tried to find purpose in routine. He went to work, forced small talk, and pretended to eat. But grief has a way of hollowing a person out from the inside. He couldn't bring himself to sell the house, even though friends urged him to. It wasn't just a house, it was all he had left of them. In moments of unbearable loneliness, he'd replay the short videos Sophia had sent him that day. Liam's proud grin beside his Lego tower, Noah's laughter as his little cape fluttered, and Sophia's voice in the background, warm and alive. He played them over and over until his phone battery died, as if by keeping their voices alive, he could hold back the reality of their absence. But what haunted him most wasn't just their loss, it was Ashley, his own sister. The little girl he used to push on swings, who once cried when he left for college, was now the reason his world had burned down. The betrayal was a knife that never stopped twisting. He visited her once in prison, months after the verdict. The meeting took place in a sterile visitation room with a thick pane of glass between them. Ashley looked the same, calm, collected, almost serene. David stared at her for a long time before picking up the phone. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her tone was flat. "I just wanted things to go back to how they were." That sentence shattered him. There was no remorse in her words, only a childish longing twisted into something monstrous. He hung up without another word, realizing that the sister he once loved no longer existed. In her place was someone unrecognizable, someone who had traded love for destruction and family for loneliness. In the years that followed, David tried to rebuild his life, but grief became his shadow. He attended therapy, volunteered at a local victims support group, and spoke publicly about the importance of recognizing hidden mental struggles before they turn catastrophic. He wanted Sophia and the boys to be remembered for how they lived, not how they died. Slowly, through helping others, he began to find fragments of peace, but it was never complete. Every anniversary, every birthday that passed without them was a reminder that time heals only what it can reach, and some wounds lie too deep for even time to touch. Late at night, David would sit on the porch, staring into the quiet street where it all began. The same street where laughter once danced through the air, now haunted by the ghosts of memory. Sometimes he'd whisper their names, just to hear them aloud, as if they might somehow hear him. And in those moments the truth was unbearable yet clear. Forgiveness was impossible, closure a myth. The only thing left was endurance, the strength to keep breathing in a world forever changed by a sister's betrayal. And that perhaps was the cruelest part of all, that love and pain could exist so tightly bound, both born from the same heart, one that would never be whole again. Years after the murders, Charleston still whispered the name Ashley Callison like a ghost that refused to fade. The case had become more than just a tragedy. It was a wound etched into the town's collective memory, a story parents told their children when they spoke about trust, envy, and the fragile boundaries of family love. The Mitchell home stood empty for months after the investigation closed, its windows boarded, the lawn overgrown. Some said they could still see the flicker of lights at night. Others claimed to hear faint laughter when the wind passed through the trees, though everyone knew it was only their minds replaying echoes of what once was. The tragedy had marked not only one family, but an entire community that now viewed the world through a slightly darker lens. The thought that evil could grow quietly inside a familiar home had changed them forever. In Charleston schools, teachers began using the case in psychology discussions, urging students to talk about jealousy, mental health, and communication. "We can't bring Sophia and the boys back," one counselor said, "but we can make sure their story saves someone else." The Mitchells' neighbors held vigils every March, lighting candles on the steps of what had once been a happy home. David attended each year, standing quietly at the back, his face illuminated by the soft glow of hundreds of flames flickering in the night. He never spoke during the ceremonies. He didn't need to. His silence said everything, a reminder that some pain can only be carried, not cured. Ashley, now serving a life sentence, remained in solitary confinement for her own safety. She rarely spoke to anyone, refused visits from her parents, and spent most of her time sketching in a worn notebook that prison staff kept under close watch. Some pages were said to be filled with drawings of her brother's family, others with scribbled words no one could decipher. The story of Ashley Callison became a grim cautionary tale, one that parents, teachers, and psychologists dissected to understand how love could turn into something deadly. Documentaries and true crime podcasts revisited the case, each trying to make sense of how a girl so young could harbor such malice. But perhaps what made the story most haunting was its lack of warning signs. There were no dramatic outbursts, no criminal record, no history of violence. Ashley had been the girl next door, the helpful babysitter, the trusted sister. That was what terrified people most, that darkness could look so ordinary. For David, life eventually found a fragile rhythm. He sold the house and moved to a smaller apartment near the water, where he could watch the tides roll in and out, finding comfort in their steady rhythm. He never remarried, never had more children. Instead, he poured his energy into a foundation created in his family's name, the Sophia, Liam, and Noah Memorial Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of family violence and promoting mental health awareness in schools. "If one life can be saved because people talk about what happened," he said once in an interview, "then maybe they didn't die for nothing." His words carried the kind of quiet strength that only comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. As the years passed, Charleston began to heal in small ways. The Mitchell house was eventually torn down, replaced by a park where children now play, their laughter mingling with the rustle of trees. A single plaque stands at its center, engraved with the words, "In memory of Sophia, Liam, and Noah, love is the legacy we choose." And every year, when David visits, he sits on a nearby bench as the sun sets over the grass where his children once played, letting the sound of laughter wash over him like a fragile form of peace. The world, in all its cruelty, had taken everything from him, yet he remained, proof that even in the face of unspeakable loss, the human spirit can endure. The legacy of that tragedy wasn't only death and sorrow, it was the reminder that love, even broken and battered, still finds a way to survive.